You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, we are very lucky that John Nichols hasn't gotten bored with us yet, and he's back. He is, of course, the editor-in-chief of Cap Times in Wisconsin and national affairs correspondent for The Nation. John, welcome.
Edwin, it's good to be with you, sir.
So I know you spent time in New York in the run-up to the mayoral election there, and I want to talk about that. But first, can I just get your wisdom on three little things? The Supreme Court session that just ended, the prospects for Trump's ugly reconciliation bill, and his foray into Iran. All
right. Well, let's take one at a time, and then you can remind me if I forget something. First and foremost, the Supreme Court session is the last week or so, the last 10 days, incredibly scary. Because what had developed since Trump became president was sort of a sub-argument that suggested that while things were bad, and certainly the courts were not, upending everything he was doing, there was reasonable evidence that the courts were pushing back. And so the theory was that on the craziest of things, the worst of things, it was likely that, things would turn out okay, right? The Supreme Court, or at least some of the courts, would push back, right? And that didn't happen. Didn't happen on birthright citizenship, although that's a complex one. It didn't happen on a number of these other issues that arose. And so I think what you take away from it, Edwin, is an indication that the court is worse than we thought, less likely to come to the rescue. And I know there's a lot of liberals and, predictable people who will say, oh, we all knew the court was terrible. No, you didn't. Quite frankly. What you knew was you didn't like a lot of the people that got put on the court, and you presumed they were going to do some bad stuff. But you didn't know that they were going to be as bad as they have turned out to be. And that's a big deal, because what that means is the court is not coming to our rescue. And it also means that if Democrats take control of the House and the Senate in 2026, they got to stop approving judges. If Trump nominated somebody great, well, of course you approve that person, right? Or even a moderate, right? That's fine. But if Trump keeps nominating extremists, you can't say yes to that, right? That just doesn't function. And then if Democrats come to power in 2028, they have to have a plan to reform the courts, to expand the number of people on the Supreme Court, to address a lot of these other issues. That's a big deal. And so what's happened last week is no small matter. It changes a lot of our discussions, and I think, frankly, it invites us to get a lot more serious about the challenges we face, and especially what's going on with the courts. That's a big deal.
So
your second question.
Right. Well, hang on. Let's stick with that one for 1 second.
Okay.
Friendly amendment. You said the court is not coming to our rescue. I think the court is actively harming us.
I did do that.
Yeah. And for too long on the left, people have outsourced our progress to lawyers, thinking the court was better than it is as an institution.
100%
and we have to relearn the muscle memory of organizing and mass movements.
Well, you're nailing it right there. And, Robert M. LaFollette, when he ran for president 100 years ago, in 1924, one of the biggest themes of his platform, good Wisconsin man, one of the biggest themes of his platform was you can't trust the courts. The courts are actively going to try, and in that case, what he was saying was undermine the working class, undermine unions, undermine, the fight against power. But it's broader now, and if we take that in, it doesn't mean we're fine. We still have a lot of problems, but we've got a stronger analysis. So what we've learned for the last 10 days or so is to have a much stronger analysis as regards the courts.
Yep. Okay. That's the court session.
Two other ones.
Well, we have this reconciliation bill that they're voting on, starting to vote on as you and I are speaking.
Today. Yeah. Look, it's terrible bill, and it will get somewhat moderated by the Senate, and then it'll go back to the House. And so we've got a lot of fights ahead of us. The reality is that the Republicans have lost their fight on this. Doesn't mean they won't pass something. They could pass something really bad, but they won't pass what they passed in the House, and they probably won't even get to near where they wanted in the Senate. We've been able to beat them back on a lot of fronts, but we can't be satisfied with that. Anybody who says to you, oh, well, I guess we'll have to compromise with them. No, there's no compromise when they're coming for Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. And frankly, when all sorts of veterans programs and other things are threatened, the answer to this has to be no. We can't do this. Now, the lucky thing is that there are some right-wing Republicans who also object. They object because of their, strict fiscal conservatism. I may not agree with that, but, that's where they're at, and that's cool. The combination of a united Democratic front with a handful of right-wing Republicans means that we have a very good chance of stalling this thing, and the longer it's stalled, the better, frankly.
From your mouth to God's ears. I think they're going to buy the votes, and I don't think we're that lucky, but I hope you're right. Oh, my gosh.
No. I think, look at one of the things I agree with you. This is not easy. I'm telling you what we have to do, not what we will do, because the Democrats in Congress don't always do what they should. But they're talking about one interesting thing as an example. This is very good. They're talking about requiring the clerk of the Senate to read the entire bill, which you can do, right? That will delay for days. And this is the kinds of things that you do. Frankly, I hate to say it, it's petty, but it's, at the end of the day, if you're talking about taking away people's Medicaid, right? Yep. So that's my perspective on it. And I think, frankly, this is something they wanted to do by Memorial Day. We're on the cusp of the 4th of July. And, if we keep fighting, who knows? Maybe we get to Labor Day or even later. To get beyond Labor Day, this becomes a big issue in the odd-year elections in the fall in Virginia, New Jersey, mayoral seats around the country, et cetera. Democrats keep fighting, fight hard.
I like hell.
And yeah. All right. Yep. And then you had a third one.
Iran, but I don't. That's up to you if you have any thoughts about that.
I think the Iran thing is a really. It was deeply unsettling because the president did it without any congressional consultation. There was no oversight. We should always remember that, when we let presidents get us into undeclared wars, things go badly. And so right off the bat, I'm glad that some people like Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey and some others pushed back. I think that was really important. I think it did have some influence on Trump. I think he's kind of dialed things back now a little bit. I think he realized this isn't a fight that he wants to be in the middle of. And so we may be headed in the right direction, but this is incredibly volatile stuff. And Trump does not listen to anybody at the State Department. He doesn't listen to people who offer sound advice. And so he put us in, as a country, and frankly as a world, in an incredibly dangerous place. Right? And it's a reminder. You don't have to look at the precise, granular details of what just happened, but look in the broader sense and recognize that within the last week or so, we were on the verge of potential nuclear war. And if you realize that, and you realize how casually Donald Trump approaches these things, you start to get a perspective that this is a very dangerous president. He's not just dangerous because of what he does when he wants to do something or when he believes in it or whatever. He's also dangerous because he does not know the basic facts of regions in which he's meddling.
And he's not interested
facts
in
will tell you that's right. No. He will not listen to conservative Republicans who tell him what he should listen to or think about. And so as a result, we will be in this place again. It may not be as regards Iran, but it'll be someplace else. And we should be very conscious of that.
I mean, I was struck by this. On June 16th, Bibi Netanyahu, who had gone to war with Iran, told the whole world that Israel's mission has been successful. We have set Iran's nuclear program back a very, very long time.
Yep.
6 days later, Donald Trump says, I'm going to bomb Fordo. But we know from Bibi that the mission had already been accomplished, that there wasn't, so you gotta wonder what was really on his mind here, because it wasn't that anybody was under threat from nuclear weapons in Iran anymore. So
this is an interesting thing because there is some suggestion that he was just watching everything that was going on and decided that, he wanted to be a part of it. And if it's as simple as that, that's a really scary reality.
But very big abuse of power. Yeah.
Well, and also there's one deeper reality too. This lack of knowledge, this lack of focus. We don't even know what, if anything, was accomplished in Iran. But smart analysts, people like Trita Parsi and others, will tell you there's a very good chance that the Iranians had all of their uranium, or the Iranians had all their uranium and all their other essential tools mobilized. And so as a result, they could move them out at a moment's notice. And so we don't have any assurance, really, that there was success in that mission. Now, Trump doesn't like it when we say that. He's threatening to sue, I think, various publications and broadcast outlets. Yeah. But I'm not trying to be mean to Donald Trump. I'm just saying, if we listen to the experts, well, I'm just saying if you listen to the experts will tell you they do not know whether we achieved what he said we did. Yeah. That's a mess. Yeah.
Mess. All right, let's turn to New York because you were there for a while, and I think it's fascinating because it's New York, but also it's a generational shift in our politics, and it is a lovely example about how money doesn't always win.
That's right, and it was a lot of money. I mean, understand this. Yeah. Zoran is he had a lot of money, enough money to run a really good campaign, about $8 million. But the other guys had their own $8 million, and then they had tens of millions more coming in for their super PACs. And I was in New York in the run-up to the election. If you turned the television on, all you saw was negative ads on Zoran Mamdani. They were all attacking at every turn, and they were brutal, and they accused him of everything you can imagine. What's incredible about it is that as they attacked him, his numbers went up. And why is that? My thinking is that one of the lessons from New York, maybe not the only lesson, but an important one, is that people really are getting beyond this. You know what I mean? They're increasingly not watching as much television, using social media more. But also, I think people are developing a greater skepticism, or at least a thicker skin, when it comes to political lies of this kind. And so the fact that he came through this primary with a big win, despite all the attacks on him, that's a very encouraging thing. And then you say, well, how did he do it? What was the trick of it? Strong stands on the issues, a clear focus on practical realities in people's lives, and a grassroots army, if you will, of around 50,000 people, just a huge mobilization at the grassroots. Those are the things that insulated him from all the attacks. And I think for the Democratic Party, the lessons are very, very simple. What you want is an edgier politics that speaks much more boldly, much more effectively, doesn't apologize for being radical on some stuff, but your boldness and your radicalism has to be on the issues that people care about, right? And that's kind of the heart of the matter. I'll give you a very good example. In one of the debates, they asked, where would you take your first trip as mayor, right? And because Zoran Mamdani has been very critical of Israel, and his opponents tried to make that a part of the campaign. Several of them, many of them said, my first trip would be to Israel. Right? Okay, that's practical. That's fine. It's part of politics. Zoran Mamdani's answer was, my first trip would be the 5 boroughs of New York. I'm running to be mayor of New York. I want to go talk to the people. You know what I mean? It was by far it's just a brilliant answer, right? And you can debate the guy. You can disagree with him on particular issues. But you got to recognize this is somebody who listens to the questions that he gets asked and actually tries to give a good answer, which he did.
I think people are tired of a certain kind of politics. Is it true? I heard this, and I wasn't there, so I don't know this. Did Andrew Cuomo run a Willie Horton ad? Did he run an ad that darkened Mamdani's beard and made it longer?
One of his PACs is accused of that. Not Cuomo himself, not his own campaign, but I think a PAC associated with him. I think it was one funded by Michael Bloomberg. But the accusation is rooted in something that was highlighted by Mamdani. And, there were pictures of him, yes, with a darker, longer beard.
I think people, particularly Democrats, are sick of that. Sick of it.
Yeah. I think people in general, I think they don't like that. Yeah, I agree with you. But then the other thing is, even when stuff like this happened, the one thing to understand about Mamdani is he kept it fun. He kept it light. He did not let them bring him down to a point where he was ranting and raving or, overly upset.
He didn't play a victim ever.
No, he was moral and practical, and he gave a great speech on anti-Semitism in which he talked about what it meant to him to be accused of it. That's a pretty rough accusation, right? It's something nobody wants to have said about him. And he instead of running away from it or denying or doing whatever, he gave a thoughtful speech in which he talked about what he believes, why he believes the things he believes, but also saying, I think in a very sincere way, that if I'm the mayor, I'm going to protect everyone in this city, and that includes our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Muslim brothers and sisters. He spoke about it in that way, and I think, not everybody would be satisfied with that answer, right? But I think for a lot of people, it was it was a healing answer, and it told you a lot about how he'll operate if he becomes mayor.
So I reminded me, way back when Barack Obama was running for president the first time, and he was attacked because his minister gave a sermon that included a sentence about America that wasn't particularly complimentary. Barack ended up giving, his barbershop speech where he talked about, I get this charge about being angry and black, but let's talk for a minute about what's going on. And it was a similar kind of thing. It was not a bunch of sound bites. It was an honest, thoughtful, conversation on a topic that's normally too hard for politics.
Yeah. And look, this is the thing about Mamdani, I think, in general. He was, I guess the way to say it, Edwin, and this is one of the more interesting, maybe to me at least, one of the more interesting ways to discuss a campaign. Campaigns are very intense. They demand a lot from you. You're supposed to get up early, stay up late, work really hard, blah, blah, blah. Most politicians don't. Most politicians spend all their time in an air-conditioned room calling down a list of names asking for money. Mamdani didn't do that. Mamdani actually was turning money back after a certain point because he had reached the fundraising limits. And so he was out actually campaigning. He often started before 6 in the morning and went some nights till 2 or 3 in the morning. And oddly enough, when you do that, you have a lot of time. And this is the interesting thing. Mamdani, in the course of this campaign, took a lot of time to talk about issues, to talk with people, to listen to people, to go to their neighborhoods. If there was a neighborhood where he wanted to up his profile, he didn't just, make one stop in front of a bodega. He would walk the streets, sometimes for a day, with local elected officials. The end result was it seemed as if he had all the time in the world. And you know what? If you're looking for a mayor, you want somebody that's got the time for you. Right? You want somebody who seems like, I can handle this. You want me to come be out there at 9 o'clock? I can get out there at 9 o'clock. He even on the last day of the campaign, or last Friday of the campaign, amazing thing. He went on at 5 o'clock. He goes on social media. And he says, I'm up at Inwood in the very top of Manhattan, the very tip of Manhattan. I'm going to start right now. I'm going to walk down all the way to the bottom of Manhattan, the other end. That's miles and miles. And, the whole island of Manhattan. I'm going to walk the whole thing tonight. If you want to join me, come along. And he walked through the city, through, Riverside neighborhood, Harlem, Upper West Side, down into around Carnegie Hall and places like that, down into, Times Square, into Chelsea, the West Village, the East Village, down all the way to the very bottom of Manhattan. And it was just a beautiful thing. You know what I mean? Beautiful. And every place he went, people jumped up from tables. The kids got their band instruments, their school band instruments, and came out and walked with them and played music while he was going. That is. Yeah. And then he finishes up down at 2 a.m. At 2 a.m., he finishes up down at the tip of Manhattan, the southern tip. And he said, He said, and as I got there weren't a lot of people out partying. There weren't a lot of people out at bars, not down all the way down there. But I saw the guys who work on the Staten Island ferry coming up out of the subways, getting onto those ferries, because there's somebody working 24/7 to making New York City function. And I had the honor of seeing the Staten Island ferrymen and women coming to work at 2 in the morning.
Scott's like a great campaigner. Wow.
How do you not like that?
I love that. So what does it mean for Democrats? And maybe it doesn't mean anything, but maybe it does. That Andrew Cuomo, after a lifetime of being a Democrat, is saying, yeah, that doesn't matter so much. I'm thinking of leaving the party and running as an independent to run this race all over again.
Well, that tells you exactly what you want to know. There are some people who aren't really Democrats. What they are is, they're themselves, right? They're self-interested, and they're going to do what they want to do. And frankly, if they've got a loyalty, it's usually to corporations and billionaires who write big checks, right? That's the reality. And there's a lot of Democrats who would, meet that standard, if you will. And so I think it's very telling. But I think the other telling thing is this. And I want to emphasize this very strongly. I watched that campaign closely. There's a good chance Andrew Cuomo could have won the primary. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, no, he's a bad guy, and all sorts of negatives on him. And then, boy, does he have the negatives. I mean, I'm not denying that. But if he had run a more upbeat campaign, if he had talked about things he had accomplished and wanted to accomplish, if he had offered people something positive and hopeful, I think he would have done much better. I don't know if he would have actually won. I think Mamdani had something amazing going on. But Cuomo could have done much better. He chose to run a brutally negative, crude, disengaged campaign that made you feel lousy just watching it, right? It was all negatives. It was all fear. He didn't talk about, the fact that he actually had a hand in, fixing up train stations and airports and bridges, and you know what I mean? That he was a guy who actually did take a strong stand for gay rights at a critical moment, gay marriage. And so at the end of the day, Cuomo ran a lousy campaign and he got beat. Now he's suggesting, apparently, that he wants to run another lousy campaign, right? A fear-based campaign. Oh, don't elect this young man because even though you liked him in the primary, as you learn more about him, you'll like him less. Well, I don't think it's going to happen, frankly.
I'm sorry to hear that, Tom. I'm just so sorry. I mean, I worked with Andrew at HUD years ago. We were colleagues.
There you go.
And I'm sorry that this is what it's come to. I remember, again, go back to Chicago when Harold Washington won the Democratic primary. It was before we had a nonpartisan election for mayor. So there was
right.
The Republicans, they had a campaign called Epton Before It's Too Late. And the before it's too late meant, oh, my God, Chicago might elect a black mayor. And we did, and it was terrific.
Yeah. Well, but you see, that's kind of what Cuomo's playing with now. And, at the end of the day, that just isn't going to it doesn't inspire. It doesn't speak to the moment. And what I'm seeing, and this is a big deal, what I'm seeing as we move toward this election is a lot of Democrats who I hadn't fully expected stepping up and doing the right thing, right? Endorsing Mamdani, not playing around, not fooling around. The unions are, jumping on board his campaign. The Building Services and Janitors Union, which is a very, very big one in New York, the hotel workers, others are endorsing Mamdani. Now, they had backed Cuomo, many of these people in the primary, but they are coming to Mamdani. The reason they're doing that is because they realize he's speaking to their members.
I bet their members are saying, come on now.
Yeah. And there will be some Democrats who don't endorse. There's some who will maybe even go with Cuomo if he runs. I don't know that he will for sure, but if he does. But they are the past. They're the people who can't get their head wrapped around, the fact that we have a new politics today. And this new politics is a politics that demands much more authenticity, much more of an engagement with where people are at. And like I said, there may be some prominent Democrats who do not endorse Mamdani, but they're going to identify themselves in the same kind of way, Edwin, and you remember this from '83.
Mm-hmm.
Those Democrats who didn't endorse Harold Washington, right? Who didn't, even in the primary, right? There was folks who were with him, folks that weren't, and then in the general election, of course, there were folks that went against him. And boy, did they identify themselves, right? You knew who they were. And what I'm saying about that is that at a certain point in history, you don't have to be on the bandwagon from day one. It's totally legitimate to say I had to be convinced. But once you get to the point where it's logical to be convinced, if you still resist the future, I think you do yourself more harm than you do the candidate that you refuse to endorse.
Yes, we remember the people who stood in the schoolhouse gates. Yep.
That's right.
Yep. Yep.
And you just remember the people that weren't there where you needed them to be. And I can just give you one quick example. I think we probably got a minute left, maybe less. But, Bill Moyers just passed away. And yes, Bill Moyers was one of the greatest communicators I could think of. And he was press secretary for Lyndon Johnson. And at a certain point, in the middle of Lyndon Johnson's term, he left. And as time went on, they said, "Why did you leave?" And he said, "We had become a war administration. We were focused on the Vietnam War. And I realized there wasn't anything more I was going to be able to do that was creative and dynamic and meaningful on the domestic front." Well, that's a real indictment, right? That's a powerful statement. And yet he was right, and he recognized it, right? He said it. And all I'm telling you is he had been very loyal to Lyndon Johnson. He had been Lyndon Johnson's kind of wingman. And then, at a certain point, he decided it was time to go. All I'm telling you is if you pay attention in politics, you realize when it's time to be on one side or the other. Yeah. And I think Mamdani is going to give us some of those types of choices as we go forward.
I think so, too. And I wish him well. There's so much that I don't know from Chicago. There's, can he pay for the things he wants to pay
all
for?
Of us don't know.
All of those are real problems. Yeah. I wish him nothing but the best and hope that he is able to accomplish 3/4 of what he hopes to accomplish.
Look, I'll tell you this. He's a young man. He's going to evolve, too.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
33-year-old. If a 33-year-old becomes mayor of New York, you can bet he's going to evolve. And in some ways that you like, maybe some ways you don't. But the bottom line is he's captured people's imagination, and we should be very careful about not paying attention when somebody rises up and captures people's imagination.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, look, as always, it's great to catch up. I appreciate our conversations. Listen, everybody, read John's stuff in the Cap Times, because Wisconsin is always important, and in the nation about what's going on all over the country.
Thanks, brother. It's great to be on with you.
Great. Talk to you soon.
Take care, brother.
Bye.